All right, everyone, I'm here with Dr. Michael Addis, the author of Invisible Men, Men's Inner Lives and the Consequences of Silence. And it's funny because I was reading your book and I was so glad that the way you started it is Invisible Men. Who are you kidding? The title of this book may make you wonder. Invisible Men, who are you kidding? Everywhere we look, we see men's lives on television, in sports, in politics, at work. And at home, men are anything but invisible. But at the same time, most men's inner lives remain hidden from others and often from themselves. But I'm just glad you put it out there because I do think, especially, being a woman, and I feel like society lately men seem to be, for lack of a better word, going through some stuff. And so a lot of times, and we'll talk about this more towards the end of the episode, a lot of times my empathy is really running thin. And it shouldn't, because I have anxiety disorders and I want to use this podcast to help others. But I do like that you recognize and are talking about, we're not saying that, men aren't out there, but they're living two different lives, right? They're living their public facing life. And I don't even mean like a celebrity, but just anyone. And then on the inside, they're suffering from anxiety. And I know someone listening might go, well, duh, that's everyone with anxiety. But can you explain to us what's so unique in men about that?
Well, I think we're, encouraged from almost day one to have this sort of public persona, which lives up to images of what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine. And a lot of that is about being powerful, impactful, stoic, more powerful than women, right? I mean, this is where I think your strained empathy comes from, is that if you look around, it's like guys are everywhere saying, look at me, but it's only part of me, right? It's the part that is that fits those societal ideals. And a lot of times to achieve that, we have to sort of squash and hold back the part that doesn't have a friggin' clue what's going on, and the part that's afraid or anxious or depressed or super stressed out, because saying, I don't know what's going on and I'm struggling is, essentially not very manly. So I think that's where the duality comes from.
So, yeah. And, the way I relate to this is, I'll give you an example. I had panic disorder. I guess I still do, but I'm not really panicking a lot. But where I used to panic all the time was airplanes. And sitting on the plane, I would compare and despair. I'd look around at other people. Oh, well, none of them are panicking. That guy's reading a book. That woman's doing a crossword puzzle. What's wrong with me? Then shame, and then shame makes the panic worse, all that kind of thing. But I only had those experiences situationally, right? So I can't imagine walking around thinking, like, for example, with the men that do know they might have anxiety, and we'll talk about ones that don't, but thinking, well, I can't even let anyone know this, because for me on the plane, I would feel embarrassed or scared to let anyone know. And so I would hold it in, which would make it worse. But thank God those were only situational things for 1 to 6 hours at a time. But walking around the world that way, what can that do to a person's, personality, temperament, physical? Can it hurt their body? I mean, what does that do over time to a guy?
That's stressful. What you're talking about is the consequences of guys hiding our true selves from each other, right? So one of those rules from early on about manhood is, no matter what's going on inside, project externally like everything's cool. And you see this really coming out in the adolescent and teen years. That sort of super unemotional teenage boy is almost like an icon now. Nothing troubles him. And what happens is, you look at other guys. I remember this very clearly growing up, and it still happens now, is looking at other men and thinking, well, he sure looks like he's got it going on, nothing bothers him. And so now I've got two issues, right? One is I'm struggling on the inside if I'm dealing with panic or anxiety or any sort of vulnerable emotion. And then the second problem is it feels like there's something shameful about that, because look around me and other guys aren't talking about it. And they've got this long practiced kind of cool pose, right? That indicates, or at least seems to indicate, everything's fine. And And I don't mean to position myself as above that either. I'm sure I've been told this by my students. There's a lot of ways I'm capable of giving off sort of everything's great, nothing bothers me sort of thing. And so, yeah, it's, it's not exactly the emperor's clothes, but it's close. It's close to that.
So tell me then about why you got into this specific kind of work. I know you talk in your book about a friend of yours who's a PhD who was studying borderline personality disorder in men. And then you were saying that what she said is that men with BPD seem brittle, but women come across as fragile. And you were saying, the difference is with men being more brittle, if it seems like if you reach out and touch them, metaphorically speaking, they just might crack entirely, And unlike a lot of people with anxiety disorders, men aren't necessarily worried about going insane. It's sort of like, if I'm insane, then maybe I won't even know it. It's something different. I know that I just asked you 3 questions, but can you talk about how you got started in this and what is that difference between, women might appear fragile who have anxiety, men might appear brittle?
So, yeah, I went to graduate school in clinical psychology with the idea that I was going to become a psychotherapist and help people, through talk therapy. Started doing a lot of research on counseling approaches. And one of the first things I noticed was that the majority of people coming in for therapy were women. Second thing I noticed was, wow, I'm the only guy in my graduate class here. And the third thing I noticed was, now that I'm the only guy around, I'm starting to see some of the things that I learned about being male that are affecting how I'm doing in graduate school and how I'm approaching this whole enterprise of, talking about emotions and trying to help people. That all kind of coalesced when I came to Clark University in the mid 90s, and I started getting interested in the question of why men don't attend therapy as often as women. Do a little bit of research and see that not only do we not go to therapy as much, but we don't go to the doctor as much. We don't take care of our health as much. We don't disclose problems as much, and the list goes on. It's really sort of a curious thing. And so, a lot of this led into an interest in how men get taught to or to not recognize problems in our lives, all the way back to are things okay or not? Do I even know myself that things are going on that are difficult? You mentioned too the fraddle versus bridle, the fragile versus brittle.
Yeah.
There's a new diagnostic category. That distinction actually came from one of my graduate school advisors, Marcia Linehan, who was she developed this therapy for borderline personality disorder, dialectical behavior therapy, and she became world famous for helping people, particularly people who were prone to self-injury. And she was not interested in gender in particular, but early on in my career, I visited her one time, and she asked me what I was doing. I told her about, being interested in men's mental health, and she said, the guys that I see, the very few of them with BPD, it's like they're like brittle rather than fragile. And I asked her what that was about. And she said, well, the women present as fragile in the sense that I have to be really careful around them. But the guys are they're brittle. They seem really well held together. And if you poke a little bit, they're fine. But you get this sense that if I poke a little bit too much, they're just going to explode into shatters. And I thought, what an amazing metaphor that is, because I can relate to it personally. And it was true to my experience doing therapy with men too, that I felt quite a bit more resistance to the idea that you might be suffering, the idea that you might be vulnerable. But it also felt that as tough as that resistance was, there was almost in some ways more raw vulnerability underneath it. And in some ways that rawness is a byproduct of having to expend so much energy holding yourself together because of the fear of what would it mean if I can't hold it together, and we know that what it means is you're normal. You're a human being, right? And I think it's important for listeners to realize too, that when we talk about men as being brittle, it's not that they're actually brittle and going to completely fall apart if they allow themselves to acknowledge what they're feeling.
Mm.
It's more that's the fear, right?
Yeah.
And it's this sense that I'm just going to explode. It's like I've seen so many men come through our research studies who will deny anxiety or depression, and despite scoring off the charts on these standardized kinds of questionnaires, and I'll say, so tell me about that. So from your perspective, you're not anxious. Why is that? And they'll say, well, I know I'm not anxious because my wife has anxiety and she's a basket case and I'm still able to get up and go to work. So if I'm able to get up and go to work, that means I'm doing okay. And I'll say, what about what's happening privately? What about, I get it. You're doing really well and you're gutting it out, and that's great. And so I'm not suggesting that that you're crazy or or anything like that. But in terms of like what it feels like on the inside, what's going on, in that sense, and then it's like if you can make that connection, it's like, well, I'm just exploding on the inside.
Mm.
That's it's overwhelming, but I don't have anxiety.
How do you, what happens, I guess, when a man that you're talking to does realize it's anxiety? Does his worst fear come true and he thinks he's weak, or, like what's the reaction? Is there any relief, or is it like, does it just turn into more problems?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that all depends upon the context, right? So ideally it turns into relief, because the recognition that, that what I'm experiencing is not uncommon. There's lots of other people, and importantly, other men who've experienced this. And, we don't have to look far into, fortunately these days, into professional athletes, politicians, famous, men with I like to say, lots of masculinity in the bank. These guys too have struggled. So ideally there's relief. But as I think you pick up on, language can be really powerful. And a lot of us men grow up with a sort of femophobia. If something's been labeled feminine, it is frankly if it's feminine, it's frankly frightening. And so if anxiety, quote unquote, strikes a guy as shameful and weak, then his initial reaction to it might be shame, fear, self-hatred, guilt, and so on. Hopefully they begin to understand, like I'm sure you've talked about many times on your show, that anxiety is an evolved mechanism in all human beings. It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
And an anxiety disorder is really nothing more than a sort of oversensitivity of a basic mechanism in the human body and mind. And that's, there's nothing to be ashamed of about that.
I know, I was thinking, we all know the caveman thing, and that gets said a lot on this show. And, it's back from when we were blah, 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 and we had to sense if danger was coming, and humans, were able to, we had to use our brains to realize when danger was coming. So is there a danger? And I don't know what's going on out there in the world of helping men who have anxiety, but is there a temptation and a danger to making anxiety masculine, the way they make, like, now we're going to have shower gel for men and it's going to smell like car grease, yeah. Is that something at one point people were doing? Are they still doing it? How do you feel about that?
I can't tell you how glad I am that you brought that up, because I've done a lot of these interviews and usually I have to bring that up. In other words, what you're talking about from my perspective is this tendency culturally to man up mental health, right? The idea is if we make it macho to talk about mental health, or macho to see a psychotherapist, like have the courage to change, or like that old Viagra commercial, I remember this going, where this famous baseball player was like, I take batting practice, I take pitching practice, I take Viagra. Step up to the plate and call your doctor. It's like, I think I get the motivation to do that. It's marketing to a stereotype of men, but it comes at a cost, because even though it might be changing the idea of what's manly into something more theoretically helpful or adaptive, it's also continuing this idea that men must be manly. right?
Yeah.
Now we just need to do the opposite. We need to go from not talking about our feelings to talking about our feelings. I think the bigger problem is the idea that men need to be manly, right? Let's just let go of that a little bit and be like, let men be human, and then we'll see the real improvements in functioning, I think.
We'll be right back.
Introducing the new 3-for-1 bundle from Xfinity. Save big on unlimited internet and streaming when you add Xfinity Mobile. Go to Xfinity.com/3-for-1, call 1-800-XFINITY, or visit an Xfinity store today. Limited time offer, restrictions apply.
Mama, what does the chicken say? Dog. Cat. Giraffe.
Giraffe, really?
Giraffe.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff, like making sure your kids are buckled correctly in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right.
Visit NHTSA.gov/the right seat.
Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
So I look back, there was this book. Do you know the book Backlash by Susan Faludi?
Quite well.
Okay, I'm obsessed with it. I haven't read it since the 90s, but it stayed with me. And I almost got this chill when I read it, thinking, oh, God, I think she's right. I don't think things are going to get better. And I think even though I'm in this, it was the mid-90s, we got Hillary Clinton, First Lady, saying, I'm not baking cookies. We got Nirvana's like the #1 band, and he's going on Saturday Night Live in dresses and nail polishes. This kind of moment of feminism, and men were embracing their humanness, and not, there was both things as was going on in culture, but I was in a little bubble. So I'm like, oh, everything's great and it's getting better. And I read her book that was like, not blaming the women's movement, but saying now that women are working, the men's roles are changing, and we're not doing anything to walk the men through it, and there's going to be a backlash. And I knew she was right. And I feel like I'm seeing it now. And what's so odd is when I meet younger men who still fall into this, like you're talking about, things have to be manly, or I just keep thinking, I thought just certain generation had to die off and then we're done here, so it's just interesting to me. Like, I could understand if your dad was like, look I was in, World War II and I didn't sit around talking about my feelings, so shut up. But now we're so many generations from that. Why is this still happening? Like, where is this message coming from? Because there's so many examples the opposite, but it's really doesn't seem to have gotten better.
Where's this message coming from?
Yeah.
Patriarchy.
But
Right.
but that's what I mean is, like, isn't the president of patriarchy like dead now? You know what I mean? Like, so president of patriarchy passed it down to his son. And if we're looking at patriarchy as like a corporation, I get it. But in other words, I guess it's like an impossible question where it's like, there are, especially with social media, so many more examples now of being a man, which could just be anything, but it still seems just as bad as when there was only the Marlboro Man on TV. Why? Am I being negative, or is it getting better at all? Or why is it still happening?
I think, I'm being facetious about patriarchy. Yeah. But I think on some level it's true. Like that this idea that it's not even idea. It's a absolutely over-rehearsed path of least resistance practice that people are born into, in which men are supposed to be dominant in some way over women. Has that changed? Yes, in some ways, right? Like, I've got lots of young students in my classes who grew up with a sort of positive feminist ideology, or just the absence of what is now called toxic masculinity. And I see lots of young men who are, they're not homophobic, they're not misogynist, they're, for all intents and purposes, progressive in the way that they're thinking about things. And then there are also the sorts of actions that you see that would fall under Susan Faludi's idea of backlash. That for if women's increased access to power in society, you will see men threatened by this. And I think part of that is that there's still a tremendous amount of economic inequality. There's still a tremendous amount of white privilege. There's a lack of education, and I think a tremendous amount of fear for a lot of men. A lot of what some men feel entitled to is now threatened. So yeah, you have to be on the watch for Backlash. Was it Springsteen and One Step Up and Two Steps Back, that song? But the problem with that is that just means you're going to end up going backwards all the time. And that's not a useful way to look at things. I think we're making progress, but I think it's up to us as men to model for each other more adaptive ways of being in society. You know, I don't think this is on women. I don't think this is on other people whose identities put them in marginalized or oppressed positions. I think it's on us, you know, to figure out.
I'm thinking, because I think, you know, like I've always tried to say, you know, feminism helps men too. It takes the men out of their boxes, which is causing them so much anxiety, and you still can be, you know, you're not less than, you're equal to. But with men, it's kind of like, I don't know what women are going to do to help. You know what I mean? Like, it does seem weirdly like a men's problem, and it's on men to solve. So that, to me, seems extra hard, because who are men going to listen to, in other words, you know, like. Right.
Well, we were encouraged, you know, to listen to other men. That's part of living in a patriarchal society. I think one of the challenges is it's not always apparent to guys what's to be gained here. You know, so if I let go of traditional notions of masculinity about toughness and emotional stoicism and dominance and so on, and being a big wheel and making a lot of money, you know, where does that leave me? And, you know, I can say, as someone who's looked at the research, well, it's going to leave you with better mental and physical health, better quality relationships, a better sex life, more sense of connection to your children, right? And a better ability to work with women and people of other genders, right? So there's a lot to be gained there. But I think on some level, you've got to experience that to buy into it. And you're more likely to experience it if you put yourself in a community of men enacting it. Yeah.
But I don't know how, you know, I guess you'd have to actively seek that out, or, you know.
You do.
Yeah.
You do. Tough. And you have to take risks too. You know, it's like you have to, I'm just thinking about times I've been out with golf buddies and been like, God, you know, how's it going? How's it going? How's it going? And I'm thinking, how's it going? It sucks right now. And this is a moment where I have to decide, am I going to say it sucks? And when they ask me, what do you mean? Or they say, oh, you know, what are you talking about? I have to be honest and say, I feel awful. You know, I've been down on myself or whatever it may be, and not just gripe about the economy or something.
Right. And then, you know, you're kind of putting yourself out there, right? It's like, then do they make a homophobic joke, or are they going to say, hey, you know, I'm glad you said that. Like, let's all cut the bullshit here. Like, I feel awful too. And is this, do you notice, like, is this a straight man problem, or does this go, you know, I don't know about it. Is has it only been studied with straight men, or is it?
No, it's right. So there's a stereotype out there that gay men have transcended this sort of restrictive masculinity because they have more access to femininity and emotional expressiveness. But the research shows that gay men are as affected by this as much as straight men. So gay men struggle with, you know, like, what does it mean to be masculine? And am I masculine enough? They struggle with body image, right? With a sort of hierarchy between more quote unquote feminine gay men and more masculine gay men and so on. So no, I mean, I think that this sort of stuff affects people of a range of identities. What you see, I think, is that, you know, at the risk of getting a little over intellectual about this, but you see gender intersecting with other identities as well. So what it means to be a white straight man in today's society, with a lot of money, I think that's a hugely very different.
Yeah. But I think that's a hugely important thing to talk about at some point in this discussion, is that I'm seeing, like, the anxiety of the white man. Like, it's I've never seen it this bad before, in my opinion, my humble, not a doctor opinion. But do you think there's some crisis going on, or is it just that we're seeing it because of social media?
Boy, that's a good question. You know, I mean, I think it's both. You know, if I had to bet on it, things like COVID and just the incredible political polarity going on in this country, there's two major stressors right there that tear at the social fabric, like, and we're, it's true for everyone, but let's talk about like guys, right? Or white straight guys. Talk about people who historically have been in relative positions of power and have had more experience hiding their vulnerability. You've got two things here that are making it harder and harder to connect with other people, and we all need to connect. Loneliness is one of the great understudied issues in men's lives. We did a study at my university where we asked students of all genders to estimate how much men in our environment at the university wanted to have closer friends, how much they felt lonely and wanted to share more of themselves with other men. And people of all genders and backgrounds estimated men to be less lonely and less in need of close connections than the men themselves actually report. So that's, to me, fascinating, right? It's like, yeah, there's all these angry guys out there, and but a lot of them, I suspect, are lonely. The problem is they're ashamed of being lonely if they know they're lonely. So, there's a couple of challenges there. Yeah.
That's really tough because, first of all, now we've been, everyone's like locked in their home in varying degrees for years now at this point. And, the internet can be a great place to connect or the worst place, if you want to find some toxic friends and feel a sense of community, it's like, but I think shame, I wanted to talk about that. I'm always trying to get people to talk about shame on this podcast and be like, but isn't it like such a cause of panic attacks? And your book really dove into that, is like shame causes men so much anxiety. So it's like not even just this like, yeah, you're going to be masculine all the time. Like, can you speak to what does shame feel like and present like in men? And what is the shame?
I mean, shame to me feels like I just want to hide, right now. There is an impending sense of doom coming from other people and the way they're thinking about me. There's something about me right now that is so unacceptable. I just need to go away. And I think for a lot of men, shame is such a powerful emotion. First of all, because it's powerful for everyone. It's in our evolution. It's there for a reason. But second of all, because so many of us guys are shame phobic. We don't know how to deal with shame itself. We don't know how to say, I feel ashamed. We don't know how to even own that we're concerned about being rejected when we are feeling ashamed, or that we're rejecting ourselves. I mean, it's just so many layers of vulnerability. It's a bit too much to swallow, frankly, for a lot of guys. So,
well, how do you like handle that on your own? Like, it seems like you're really going to go to therapy. You got to go to therapy to work that out. And there's not a lot of like quick fix things that you see going around about shame phobia, the deep level, not knowing how to verbalize shame. I mean, I never thought about that really until you just said it.
One thing I think about, so I don't think there's an easy answer to it, but there's one thing that resonates with me, and I can't remember where I first heard this. It was somewhere back in graduate school, but it's the idea that shame grows in the closet. And so I make my own shame worse by hiding that which I'm ashamed of from others. Now, I'm not going to confess everything I'm ashamed of. You got to do it in small doses. But for example, if I'm like, I've struggled with depression and anxiety for most of my life, on and off. And it occurred to me probably 15 years ago that, here I am being positioning myself as an expert on men and depression. And I haven't told anyone that I know what it's like to be depressed, and that some days I wake up just really loathing myself and feeling like all of my accomplishments are fake, and my life is fake. Well, so what good is that doing me to keep hiding that. It's what it does is it reinforces the idea that this is shameful.
Yeah.
Right? So I now talk about my experiences with depression. I'm guessing that's a big part of why you're doing this whole series, right? Is you found that talking about anxiety not only benefits other people, but it also helps you.
Absolutely. And, I was mistaken that younger people have it easier because they have the internet. So if they're anxious, they'll type anxious into Google, they'll figure it out. I didn't have the internet growing up, and then I